When both you and the narcissist go completely silent, the world does not just quiet down, it detonates. Because in that fragile moment, someone finally loses their grip on control, and it is absolutely not you. Most people operate under the mistaken belief that mutual silence is simply the end of the story, but the reality is far more unsettling and complex. This is the precise moment when the narcissist begins their true psychological spiral, and it is also the moment when your real journey toward healing begins. Please stay with me, because what unfolds from here is the part of the process that almost no one prepares you for. If what I am saying feels uncomfortably close to your own experience, then you need to sit with this. You must understand the delicate psychological terrain you are navigating, because having this knowledge is exactly how you break the toxic cycle once and for all. Let us go deeper into this process. When both you and the narcissist cease all contact, the very first thing that occurs on their side is what I call the recalibration phase. This process is incredibly subtle, deeply psychological, and it is something that most people fail to recognize because it happens in the shadows of silence, long before the narcissist ever makes an overt move. When you choose to go quiet, you are naturally viewing it as a healthy emotional shift, a necessary boundary, or a vital step toward your own healing. However, the narcissist does not interpret your silence in that way at all. To them, your silence is raw data. Your lack of response becomes a puzzle they feel compelled to decode, rather than a boundary they feel any obligation to respect. They begin to evaluate how they managed to lose their grip, instead of reflecting on how they caused you harm. Narcissists simply do not possess the capacity for self-reflection in the way that healthy, emotionally adjusted people do. Instead, they quickly assess whether you have merely become distracted or if you are intentionally punishing them for past slights. They constantly wonder if someone new has entered the picture, or if you are playing a game and testing them. They are always scanning for the angle, the hidden motive, and any potential threat to their dominance. Your silence effectively becomes a riddle they must solve because uncertainty causes them to become deeply destabilized. During this period of recalibration, they might not reach out to you at all. In fact, their silence is not an expression of indifference. It is a calculated strategy. They might spend their time watching your activity online, checking in on your shared social circles, or observing who is currently engaging with you. They are gathering intelligence, waiting patiently for your next emotional move. Narcissists operate under the firm belief that the people they have once controlled will always eventually crawl back. Therefore, they do not interpret your silence as a form of closure. Instead, they view it as a temporary form of resistance. This is exactly why they do not fall into a panic immediately. They hold back, firmly assuming that you will be the one to break the silence first, just as you have done so many times before. They rely entirely on the patterns they spend time building within you. They are counting on the residue of your guilt, your fear of potential conflict, and your lingering hope for harmony to draw you back in. They fully expect you to eventually fold. When you do not do that, their recalibration begins to intensify. They start to wonder if their influence over you is actually slipping away, and that is the moment when the threat becomes very real to them. In their world, silence is never a neutral thing. It is either an opportunity to re-establish their dominance, or it is a grave danger to their fragile ego. The longer you maintain your silence, the more they feel the ground shifting beneath them, because your silence effectively disrupts the power dynamic they have relied upon for so long. When both sides fall into this state of silence, the emotional experience is remarkably different for you than it is for the narcissist. This stark contrast reveals an uncomfortable yet necessary truth. You are feeling the weight of the loss, while they are merely feeling the inconvenience of your absence. When you stop reaching out, you are often left carrying the entire weight of everything that occurred between you. You are sorting through the immense emotional wreckage, the shattered trust, the lingering unanswered questions, and the profound sense of psychological exhaustion. You may be struggling with waves of sadness, feelings of withdrawal, deep confusion, or even persistent guilt. You are grieving not only the loss of the relationship, but also the loss of the version of yourself that tolerated such mistreatment for so long. Your silence is born from a state of total emotional saturation. You have reached a point where your mind and your body simply cannot handle another ounce of the chaos. You are actively trying to reclaim your personal space, your dignity, and your mental clarity. That internal struggle is heavy, and it ripples through your sleep, your self-esteem, your memories, and your sense of self. Meanwhile, the narcissist does not interpret this silence through any kind of emotional depth. They do not sit with the loss in the way that you do. They do not spend time reflecting on what went wrong, how they managed to hurt you, or what they might need to change about themselves. Instead, their initial reaction is rooted entirely in inconvenience. Your silence disrupts their established routine, not their heart. They are accustomed to having constant access to your attention, your emotional reactions, your apologies, your caretaking, and even your arguments. All of those things fed their distorted sense of importance. When you go silent, that steady stream of validation is suddenly shut off. This disruption does not break them emotionally. It simply irritates them to their core. They experience the total absence of your supply the way someone experiences losing access to a utility or a service they have relied on for years. It is an annoyance, a delay, and a significant frustration. They are not sitting there thinking about how they lost someone who was truly meaningful to them. They are simply wondering why you are not responding to them. Your pain and their inconvenience exist in two completely separate psychological worlds. You are mourning the end of the relationship while they are merely assessing their lost access to you. You are trying to rebuild yourself from the ground up while they are calculating exactly how your silence affects their ego. You feel the crushing emptiness while they feel the interruption of their normal flow. As time continues to pass, this difference becomes even more apparent. You slowly begin to realize how heavy the emotional burden actually was and how much of your own spirit you silenced just to maintain a fragile, artificial peace. They, conversely, begin to wonder why something that used to work so easily and predictably is suddenly failing. They wonder why your emotional responsiveness, which they took for granted, has suddenly stopped functioning. The imbalance becomes undeniably visible. Your silence forces you deeper into introspection and the healing process, while it simultaneously forces them into a state of annoyance and entitlement. The emotional weight you carry is profound, while the discomfort they feel is tied strictly to losing the convenience of your compliance. When both sides go silent, the narcissist does not experience that quiet as a calm pause or a mutual step back. They experience it as a direct and aggressive challenge to their ego, because silence from someone they once successfully controlled feels like a personal rebellion. The narcissist views all relationships through a singular lens of dominance rather than one of mutual respect and reciprocity. So, when you no longer respond, no longer reach out, and no longer provide them with any attention, it fundamentally disrupts the rigid psychological hierarchy they believe they established. They interpret your silence as a deliberate act of defiance, even if your only intention was simply to protect your inner peace or to regain a sense of emotional clarity. In their mind, silence is never neutral. It is an affront, it is a form of resistance, and it is proof that their influence over you is slipping away. This is precisely why silence affects them so much more deeply than any heated argument ever could. Arguments provide them with relevance. Reactivity gives them a sense of power. Even your expressions of anger reinforce their deep-seated belief that they still matter significantly in your emotional world. But silence removes them completely from the center of the stage. That removal threatens the fragile, self-aggrandizing narrative they rely on to function. Your silence forces them to confront the terrifying possibility that they are not as indispensable, desirable, or dominant as they have convinced themselves they are. Narcissists simply cannot tolerate ambiguity, and your lack of communication creates exactly that. It creates a space they cannot control or decode. Instead of seeing your silence as a healthy boundary, they see it as a targeted provocation. This is the point when their internal dialogue becomes incredibly distorted. They might tell themselves that you are being disrespectful, ungrateful, or manipulative. They might interpret your distance as a calculated game, assuming you are just trying to trigger a specific reaction from them. Their ego leads them to believe that your silence is just another tactic, rather than a clear sign of your exhaustion or your need for self-protection. Some narcissists will mentally shift into a hyper-competitive stance, seeing the silence as a battle of wills that they are determined to win. Others will frame it as a deep, personal betrayal, convincing themselves that you have abandoned them. Even though they may have mistreated you for months or even years, they will rewrite the entire meaning of your silence to protect their own self-image rather than to try and understand your human experience. As this psychological tension continues to build, the narcissist's sense of control begins to crumble. Your silence becomes a mirror reflecting their own profound insecurity. Rather than sitting with that discomfort, they begin creating elaborate narratives that serve to restore their sense of superiority. They may assume you will eventually give in because you have always done so in the past, or they may start plotting ways to punish you emotionally for not behaving according to the script they wrote for you. In their world, silence is a threat to their ego because it suggests something they fundamentally cannot accept. It suggests that you may no longer be under their psychological influence. When both sides stop contacting each other, something vastly different happens internally for the narcissist than it does for you. For you, the silence may eventually feel like space to finally breathe, space to process everything, and space to finally understand exactly what you survived. But for the narcissist, your absence creates a kind of psychological vacuum that forces them to confront the one thing they spend their entire lives desperately avoiding. It forces them to confront the total loss of control. They are incapable of thinking in terms of mutual distance or respectful boundaries. They only know how to consume, and when that consumption stops, they are left with nothing but their own hollow reflection. Instead, they interpret your disengagement as a fundamental fracture in the system they built to sustain their own identity. You have to understand that narcissists do not operate from an internal sense of worth. Their self-esteem is entirely constructed from the outside, held together by the reactions, the constant attention, and the steady stream of validation from the people in their orbit. You were a central piece of that system, and without your compliance, their fragile structure begins to crumble. As the days slowly turn into weeks, the silence stops being a minor inconvenience and transforms into an existential threat to their ego. The narcissist enters a state of hidden panic, though they will usually mask it with intense anger or an icy, cold indifference. They begin to realize that the old triggers are no longer working. The guilt trips they used to drop into your conversations have absolutely no target to land on. The subtle insults or those sudden, dramatic withdrawals that used to make you chase after them are now met with an absolute, deafening nothingness. This complete lack of a feedback loop causes their internal anxiety to spike sharply. In a healthy relationship, silence can be a productive time for reflection and personal growth, but in the narcissistic dynamic, silence is a vacuum that sucks away their entire sense of reality. They exist only through the reflection they see in others, and when you refuse to hold up that mirror for them, they are forced to look directly at their own internal emptiness. This emptiness is terrifying for them, so they must find a way to shift the blame immediately. They will convince themselves that you are the cruel one, that you are the one playing manipulative games, and that you never truly cared about them in the first place. By framing themselves as the innocent victim of your silence, they can maintain their fragile sense of moral superiority. They will tell anyone who is willing to listen how cold and heartless you have become, rewriting the history of your relationship to erase their own abusive behavior. This smear campaign is often a desperate attempt to force a reaction out of you, to break your silence and make you defend your character. They want you to scream, they want you to cry, and they want you to fight back, because any reaction from you proves they still hold power over your emotions. But if you maintain that silence, if you refuse to engage with the drama or defend yourself against their lies, the narcissist faces the ultimate defeat. They are left entirely alone with the hollow echo of their own voice, unable to extract the emotional energy they need to survive. Your silence becomes an unbreakable wall, a loud declaration that their power over you has permanently expired. while they continue to scramble for control, creating chaos in their own mind and searching for new sources of validation, you are quietly rebuilding the very foundation they tried so hard to destroy. The silence that began as a heavy burden becomes your sanctuary, the very place where your strength is restored and your future finally begins. Your emotions, your responses, and your pattern of returning after a conflict all served a very specific purpose for the narcissist. All of these reactions reinforce their sense of superiority and influence. When you choose to go silent, you interrupt that predictable cycle. That interruption forces them into a sudden, jarring moment of psychological exposure. It confronts them directly with their total dependence on your engagement, which is something they do not want to acknowledge, even to themselves. They built a narrative where they were always the dominant one, the one in charge, and the one calling all the shots. Your silence completely challenges that false story. It signals to them that you may have finally stepped out of the role they assigned to you, and this destabilizes their carefully managed identity. Without your reactions, they have absolutely nothing to push against. They have nothing left to manipulate and nothing to use as evidence of their power. This absence becomes a significant threat, not because they care about the relationship in a meaningful or emotionally mature way, but because it disrupts the very foundation of control that allowed them to feel significant. This is the exact moment when their internal state becomes restless. They may begin replaying past conversations in their mind, searching for signs they might have missed. They may wonder if someone else has taken their place in your life. They may start scanning for ways to reassert their dominance, even if they still have not contacted you directly. The silence becomes much louder for them than it does for you, because they do not know what is happening on your side of the wall. That lack of visibility robs them of the illusion that they can predict your behavior. They are suddenly outside of your world rather than at the center of it. And that loss of centrality is psychologically intolerable for them. Their mind shifts rapidly from arrogance to anxiety, from entitlement to suspicion, and from certainty to instability. All of this internal chaos is triggered by something as simple as your absence. When both you and the narcissist retreat into silence, it may seem from the outside like nothing is happening at all. But internally, the narcissist begins moving through a predictable series of compensatory behaviors designed to restore their lost sense of control. One of the most common reactions is their attempt to fill the void your absence created through hoovering, baiting, or triangulation. These tactics are not random in the slightest. They are psychological tools the narcissist uses when they feel their influence over you slipping away. Hoovering happens when they realize your silence is not just temporary. At first, they assume you will return because that is what they have conditioned you to do over a long period of time. When you do not fold, the panic starts to set in. Hoovering is their attempt to pull you back into the cycle, not because they value you emotionally, but because losing you threatens their ego stability. They may send a soft message, bring up a nostalgic memory, or send a plea centered on a crisis. They may suddenly appear remorseful, reflective, or unusually attentive. They adjust their tone to whatever they think will work because the goal is not a genuine reconnection. The goal is simply reinstating their control. If hoovering fails or feels too vulnerable for them, they will quickly shift to baiting. Baiting is designed specifically to provoke an emotional reaction from you, whether that reaction is positive or negative. Narcissists do not care which direction your emotions go, just as long as they are the ones causing them. They might post something online aimed at triggering your jealousy, send a sharp or dismissive message to get you angry, or create unnecessary drama that forces you to respond. Any reaction, even a highly negative one, restores their sense of relevance. Silence strips them of their power, so baiting becomes their way of poking the wound they created, hoping you will bleed just enough to remind them that you are still accessible. When those strategies do not work, they escalate the situation to triangulation. This is where they intentionally bring in someone else, such as an ex, a new partner, a friend, or a family member. They do this not for a genuine connection, but to craft a narrative that puts them back in control. They might flaunt a new relationship, hint that someone else appreciates them much more, or exaggerate your silence to appear like the ultimate victim. The entire point of triangulation is to make you feel displaced, insecure, or completely replaceable. It is meant to lure you back into defending your worth or re-establishing your position in their life. These behaviors are not proofs of love. They are proofs of absolute, desperate dependence. The narcissist relies entirely on external supply to maintain their sense of identity. When you withdraw that supply, they scramble for any way to patch the hole. Hoovering, baiting, and triangulation are their attempts to regain psychological dominance, not emotional closeness. Their reactions are born from fear, entitlement, and ego disruption, and all of it is triggered entirely by your choice to go silent. When the silence stretches on both sides, something profound begins to unfold that most people do not expect. While you may interpret the quiet as a step toward peace or closure, the narcissist experiences it as a growing sense of unease. Your silence is not interpreted as calm. It is interpreted as a total loss of control. Because their identity is so heavily dependent on the reactions of others, especially people they once pulled into their orbit, the absence of your response triggers a kind of internal alarm. What becomes important here is understanding that your quiet is not their peace. It is their absolute panic. Narcissists rely on emotional stimulation from others to maintain the fragile structure of their self-esteem. They need constant attention, admiration, conflict, or drama, because anything that places them at the center of someone else's emotional world is what keeps them going. When you stop supplying that energy, they feel an internal collapse beginning. They do not know how to regulate themselves without external feedback, and your silence deprives them of that crucial feedback. This creates a heavy psychological chain reaction. At first, they may try to dismiss your silence, pretending it does not matter to them at all. They may act unbothered, detached, or even relieved. But this is purely a defensive facade. As time passes, the quiet becomes much harder for them to ignore. Without your attention anchoring their inflated self-image, they start to feel insignificant, overlooked, and irrelevant. These feelings are completely intolerable for them because they strike at the core of their biggest fear, which is being ordinary, invisible, or unimportant. While you may be using the silence to gather strength or rebuild your sense of self, they experience the same silence as an emotional void that threatens their entire identity. Your nervous system begins to calm down without the constant tension or unpredictability they brought into your life. The fog finally lifts. You start to recognize your worth and reclaim parts of yourself that were heavily suppressed. You find clarity in the quiet, while they find total chaos. This contrast becomes even more stark the longer the silence continues. They might begin ruminating, replaying past interactions, imagining different scenarios, or inventing wild reasons why you are no longer engaging with them. The uncertainty gnaws at them constantly. They do not actually miss the relationship itself. They miss the reflection of themselves they used to see in your reactions. So, while your silence is healing, their silence is deeply destabilizing. You find pieces of yourself returning while they feel pieces of their constructed identity slipping away. What feels peaceful and necessary for you becomes agitating and threatening for them. This massive difference in experience is what ultimately exposes the imbalance that existed all along, showing you that the quiet sets you free while it slowly unravels them internally. When the silence settles on both sides, something begins to shift inside you in a way that often feels slow, confusing, and strangely relieving all at once. Your nervous system, which has been living in a state of constant high alert throughout the entire relationship, finally gets a real chance to stop bracing for the next emotional blow. Narcissistic relationships create a chronic state of hypervigilance. You learn to constantly anticipate their moods, their reactions, and their unpredictable emotional climate. Your body becomes tightly conditioned to expect tension, even in moments that seem calm. So, when the silence begins, your system does not instantly relax. At first, it simply does not know how to let go. You may feel agitated, restless, or deeply uncomfortable with the quiet. You may even interpret the lack of conflict as a sign of something being wrong. That response is not a sign of weakness. It is pure biology. Your body has been trained for a long time to operate strictly in survival mode. But as time passes, the heavy fog starts to lift. Your mind slowly untangles itself from the chaos. Begin noticing how your thoughts change when you are not constantly anticipating their next outburst or manipulation. Your sleep improves significantly. You start feeling moments of true stillness that you have not felt in years.